Good day, everyone. I'm Bob Ackerman, the editor-in-chief of Signal Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to our Signal Magazine webinar titled, Examine the Brave New World of Virtual Networks. Now, Aldous Huxley never imagined the challenges technology poses today. With demand growing for network presence and performance, experts are looking at new ways a network architecture can support increased expectations and requirements. One potential option is Network Function Virtualization, or NFV. NFV is a new approach that offers the potential to save time and resources while boosting network performance. In today's webinar, which is sponsored by Juniper Networks and AT&T Global Business Public Sector Solutions, two experts will describe how NVF allows the creation of virtualized platforms to support a range of network services. Among other improvements, this would remove the need for integration of disparate vendor-specific hardware and software. Now, those of you who have participated in past Signal webinars know about our modern audience interface that offers useful capabilities. At the bottom of the console are a number of widgets, especially the green Resource List widget, which you can use right now to download slides from today's webinar, along with accessing an NFV white paper and links to an NFV microsite and a news site on virtualization. Most importantly, throughout the presentation, webinar attendees are encouraged to submit questions electronically through the Q&A box on the webinar console. When our experts are finished with their presentation, they will answer as many questions as time permits during this hour-long session. Our first presenter is Chris Smith, Vice President, Technology, AT&T Government Solutions. A retired Air Force communications officer, Chris has more than 20 years of government and technical experience, along with a strong background in cloud, mobility, and security. He leads a growing team of more than 200 technologists, developing AT&T products and services for the federal marketplace. Our second presenter is George F. Holland, Vice President, National Security Group and Federal Strategy, Juniper Networks. George has been with Juniper for more than a decade after 18 years in the U.S. Defense Department and 15 years in leadership positions in the private sector. At Juniper, he focuses on serving the company's national security customers. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Chris Smith. Chris?
Bob, thanks so much. Glad to be here with you this morning and everybody who's dialed in. And George, I think we're going to have a great dynamic discussion this morning about a technology that really holds a great deal of promise to mission delivery, whether it's in national security, Department of Defense, civilian agencies, or ultimately commercial organizations as well. So it's a fine gray day here in Washington, D.C., but I've seen from the attendee list we've got people all over the country, so excited to have you guys on. I think one of the first things we should do is set the stage and talk about why we're even proposing to have such a disruptive set of capabilities in networks that have done a great job up to this point in time. The reality is that the same pressures that we've seen that led to cloud computing, the ability to use compute at a lower cost to more highly perform in a more secure nature at the most optimum costs, plus the low cost of storage, have driven us to heights of innovation and creativity that we've never seen before. And the network is going in the same direction. It's really the next frontier of virtualization. If you look back just to the beginning of this century and the year 2000, we were moving about 10 gig of data across mobile networks at that point in time on a monthly basis. Fast forward to today, we're doing 3.7 exabytes of information every month. And that's just on mobile. If you add the wireline in, the numbers are really staggering. And the reality is that the demand from things like cloud computing and storage and big data and sensor proliferation with the Internet of Things coming at us is that we're going to have to keep up with that demand, and the demand's only going to continue to grow. And so the traditional ways of doing things with a more hierarchical set of appliances that were, proprietary in nature are not going to keep up with that demand curve. Alone, there's more connected devices today than there are human beings on the planet. And last year in 2015 alone, there were another 500 million devices added on. So right around the 8 billion mark in 2015, may have even eclipsed that at this point. So the demand to have information at our disposal on small devices and even wearables in the future that can compute and give situational awareness for the mission set to best execute is going to continue to grow. So the answer to that is to virtualize the network and allow the network demands for bandwidth to go up and down with the demands for compute like we do in cloud and with storage. So there are capabilities that have been developed, and AT&T and Juniper are leading companies on the globe right now in that effort. So I thought I'd start first with a little bit about exactly what software-defined networking is, and then jump into network function virtualization and talk a little bit about what the architecture looks like, and then we'll tie it back directly into the mission again and then open it up for questions. So on the first slide you see in front of you, we talk about software-defined networking. It's really about separating the two bottom blocks, the control layer of the network from the actual data forwarding plane. And so what we're doing is we're software enabling the actual network functions and the control of the network, and then the actual forwarding of the information is that lower block, which is done over either virtual or physical set of capabilities. And again, this is going to allow us the agility to much more quickly provision networks, to do dynamic bandwidth allocation, to move in the event of security actions or DDoS attacks that may be pointed at us. It's going to give us that much more agility. It's going to give us a better cost structure to continue to keep up with the demands, and it's also going to give us that speed, agility, and resiliency. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Yes, go ahead.
Just as an addition to that, I think there's two other really, significant benefits from taking an SDN approach to the networks. The first is, I know a lot of our customers are dealing with hybrid networks where they have multiple different types of devices, across. And when you go to an SDN layer, you can really kind of take that hybrid physical infrastructure and almost treat it as one virtual infrastructure. So I think it really simplifies things. And, a follow-on benefit to that is from the program standpoint, it really does allow the customer to avoid those forklift hardware upgrades when you can do more and more with the software layer and make things work a little bit more in a coordinated, orchestrated fashion. So.
Very, very well said, George. Really, the number of individuals needed to manage and maintain the overall network is a lesser number of well-skilled individuals to bring people up to do other things within the enterprise as well. So, very good. So, what I think makes software-defined networking even more interesting than what we just talked about and everything that George added was the fact that we actually can virtualize multiple capabilities within the network as well. So we talk about network function virtualization, and the chart has a list of those, and there are many more. But if you think about how firewalls are provisioned today, or wide area network acceleration, or how LANs are done, add content delivery networks. You can add other security services on top of these. Each one of these, which to this point have either been extra software on top of a proprietary device or an appliance unto itself with its own proprietary software, now we're going to be able to be provisioned within the same user interface. It's going to be software push, so that resiliency that we talked about, the quicker time to developing and opening up network capabilities, all are at the fingertips and can be, from a capital refresh and newer technologies, also taken advantage of. So I'm going to flip to the next slide here real quick to give you an example of what that begins to look like out in a true architecture where you've got perhaps a headquarters or a large mass of people somewhere in the nation or around the globe to a more branch office type of location in the data centers or cloud access points and cloud service providers in which these services can be, as I've said, in near real-time provision, which in the past, I keep saying that provisioning time, in the past it has taken weeks to months to provision new offices. If there is a transport or access capability already there, fiber for instance, to these facilities, and we can lay down the software on the universal CPE that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, on top of that, we're talking really hours, minutes, seconds to turn on these capabilities. So you've got multiple virtual functions on a common set of hardware that's very low cost, commodity-based set of capabilities. you've got just a huge uptick in the total cost of ownership, right? And when I say uptick, it means a downward cost trend that you're seeing there. As I said, it's very easy to deploy. You still need network smarts to understand how you're going to provision the bandwidth, the quality of service, and those types of things, and how your firewall rules may need to be set. But it's an individual through a GUI, not going into a command line interface at each appliance, or trying to push to multiple devices across multiple hybrid networks. The software aspect of it makes it nearly ubiquitous depending on how you set it up. It's very easy to deploy, as I've said, and it's extraordinarily easy to manage. And I would add there, security, I think, will be one of those things we talk about. The ability, when software done right from the supply chain to assured software development up to patching and scanning, when done well, gives us really, I think, an advantage from a security standpoint because the ease of update or the ease of adjustment when things do happen, because invariably they will, is extraordinary. So the picture in front of you shows the kind of core software-defined networking capabilities with data center off to the left, a branch office to the right, which may need differing sets of network function virtualization capabilities around it versus your headquarters office and any other enterprise site. So this really will be in a ubiquitous laydown, and then you apply those functions that you need by branch office, by workload. And I think it gets even more interesting when you talk about applications that are interfacing and can take advantage of that software-defined network and the software-defined set of capabilities that are there. It means that workloads can be pushed closer to the edge, and they can be that much more resilient and that much higher performing, and ultimately, I would argue, more secure.
Hey, Chris, and I think one of the things that is really beneficial to the customer is when people start to think of routing or switching or security for the network as just another application and not a specific box. What they're able to do is really open up the creativity for how they can really automate their processes, all the way from, the WAN to the data center out to the edge. And I think when they start to think of it that way, it really expands how they can drive up mission capability while driving down cost by doing the things that you're talking about, by automation, virtualization, taking a virtualized package and putting it onto an x86 blade, versus having to worry about a specific purpose-built networking device, and I think that's where the real impact can be as we all go down this path together.
Yes, thanks, George. So I've got a similar architectural design on the next slide and chart that's up in front of you, but I want to go a little deeper, and really, George, you just did a great introduction to that. I talked about the ability to stand up new sites and days and add new services. George has clearly articulated the capability of new business functions, right, that are going to help the mission, that allow you to focus in on that. Demand scaling of speed to support the workloads is extraordinary. So think about today's ecosystem where you have legacy data centers, and then depending on what you're dealing with, to a lesser extent you may be out in the cloud, but most organizations today are building new capabilities to go cloud first. They will continue to maintain legacy environments that may be a private cloud within their own four walls, could be a private cloud within a hosted provider, but the ability now to put a multi-tenant auto-scaling set of capabilities at the front door to an Amazon or a Salesforce, IBM, you name it, is extraordinary. That means there's no capital outlay for an organization that wants to extend their network securely without touching the internet out to those cloud providers. So that's one of the first examples of software-defined networking is our NetBond capability, which we've got 12, I think coming up on 15 providers now signed up for that. You can virtually extend and utilize the bandwidth you need into those cloud providers, and its API hooks into the workload, so auto-dynamically, that's my favorite word lately, allows you to up and down the pipe, if you will, to the workload that's going on within that cloud. If you have seasonal workloads, it spikes up. You bring it back down when that workload's not going down to the bare minimum. In the past, that was extraordinary. We used to have to size the pipe to every data center, whether it was an external or an internal, to the anticipated highest workload. So that promise is there. It's delivered today. I'll use a branch office example. If an organization is going out, perhaps a forward operating area or just shifting a operation, Today, right, you have to go out, the lead time to order that service, get it put in, and actually tested, and then operational is again in the weeks and sometimes months, depending on where you're going. Today, if you stand up a branch office and you use these capabilities, again, if the fiber or the wireless signal is there that you need, then we can, on demand, set up the network and start to add those network functions that we've talked about, from WAN acceleration to border controllers to routing, firewalls, content delivery networks, you name it, that capability is coming on. So we have a term in here called UCPE that showed up on the prior slide and this one. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. This is where, to me, it gets even more interesting. So we've talked about the agility, the time, the performance that we're going to get from a software-defined network, right? But when we talk about the network functions and all these proprietary boxes and software sets and code that used to reside on these, the biggest shift that's occurring now is that a commodity box we can take and we can split the processors on that box, a vanilla piece of equipment, if you will. Just think of a large box. And we can split the processors to handle the software-defined networking aspects. And then we can set the processing power also over to these functions that we've talked about, from the firewall to routing. And we can begin to compute to do both of those software things independently and at very low cost. And as I've said, the boxes are commodity, vanilla. All we're changing is the software. So I like to use the analogy, if you think back about 5 or 6 years ago, if you wanted a good digital camera, you carried a good digital camera around. If you wanted music, you carried an iPod around. You had a phone for communications, and you might have had 2 of those. If you're out hiking or want to do something more around location, you'd have a GPS. So you'd have 4 or 5 of these devices. Well, today the smartphone is one device, and any app that you need on there for those things I just talked about is an app, right? And every time an update comes, it takes like 15 to 20 seconds to upgrade that app. So that's a good analogy to look at this. Instead of having multiple boxes with software to do a function, this is all going to be done on one device. And every time there's an upgrade in technology capability or a security patch, we're going to be able to do that in real time by just upgrading the software that's in there. And it's extraordinary, again, to the point of cost, performance, and security. George, anything to add on the universal CPE that we're talking about?
Yeah, Chris, just that we're just excited on the Juniper side about the partnership on UCPE, and we've taken all of our lessons learned and really invested a lot to get our software up into a point where we could actually deliver you guys the virtualized packages to put onto UCPE, so that you do have this commodity appliance that's very low cost, very agile, and can literally reduce, weeks of provisioning and configuration down to hours. The one thing that I would add on top of what you've already said is, once again, a lot of our customers are going to have these geographically displaced locations and areas, and the cost beyond just the software versus the hardware cost is the ability for them not have to worry about, keeping a lot of spares on site, or sending people on travel to do things on a purpose-built network appliance, but to be able to actually have these low-cost commercial appliances out there that can be upgraded and troubleshot through the network. So we see the cost savings across the board.
Right. Yeah, and I look at it as an ex-CIO, who ran a very large enterprise with about 7,000 locations in the U.S. and 100 overseas that were changing constantly, and not all 7,000, but when you have 300 or 400 locations changing over, a 3-month period or something like that, the ability to provision basically from software on a commodity box, and they all look the same. It's just the cost takeout alone is extraordinary. But I would just say getting out of a capital into more of a operating expense is the more impactful thing, right? Because it allowed me to focus on the business and getting that office up and running to focus on their mission.
Hey, Chris, will customers lose any existing capability, performance, or security if they go down the SDN and NFV path?
I'd actually say it's probably the contrary. I'd say people right now are limited with the number of functions they can put out there by budget and level of effort, right? I mean, I think everybody does their best to put the right set of capabilities in the right places throughout the network, but you're limited by time and money ultimately. So I would argue that by going to this universal CPE and software-defined set of capabilities and network functions, that in fact you're going to have a broader set of capabilities to choose from, and you get to tailor that. The beauty of it is you get to tailor it. If you've got a workload that's pretty much public-facing, there's really no security risk to it, why would you put 3 or 4 security capabilities around it on top of it? Maybe you just need a firewall, right? So that if you're protecting from misinformation or changing of it, but you don't need intrusion detection, intrusion protection, packet capture, and all those types of things. So you could really tailor it to. So I think you actually get a bump up in the number of capabilities because you're going to be spending less overall, and you're going to be able to put these on much more quickly and much more agilely.
Yeah, and Chris, on top of that, I think the money that you save from having to worry about the infrastructure costs, you can actually shift back to mission and provide a lot more capability on the mission side that you can integrate more closely with the SDN and NFV functions. So I think it can be a win for everybody.
Yeah, and why don't we just close that out with security, right? I mean, I started there with security. You could tailor what security you want on it. But the point is you have the flexibility to actually move networks. If you really are up against an extraordinarily difficult adversary who's intent on taking you off the air through denial of service, and in fact, these capabilities allow you to stand up and redirect networks. For instance, you could take that traffic and shunt it off somewhere to watch it or just to terminate it and spin up a new operational network elsewhere, really in minutes, right? Minutes and perhaps hours, depending on the complexity of what you're dealing with. So I think we've talked about this, but I think a good Venn diagram is well worth articulating how these things come together, and we're going to start shifting gears here and talk about more of the business demands that are driving this. But we've talked about fast deployment, the dynamic nature of the network, so you're using the right amount of capacity, the right amount of services dependent on the workload. Total cost of ownership, I think we've hit that multiple times, but this is going to take a great deal out of the cost to maintain and operate the networks. But it's not going to be an offset where I think you're just going to take the dollars necessarily and run over. There are always going to be good opportunities to do that. I think you're going to get more performance out of it and want to reinvest so that you've got, for instance, branch offices, which generally have struggled in getting good capacity out to them to get the job done. You're going to be able to, at the same cost, get better performance out of it. So I think the improved total cost of ownership is going to have impact in multiple ways. I talked a little bit about the capital shift over to an operating expense, which is huge for any government organization that has to go up to the Hill every year to fight for funds. The folks on the Hill very much like an operating expense that's set over time. It allows them to focus in on what they need to do and allows the agency to keep up from a technology standpoint without having to go in for a capital refresh every 5 to 6 years. And efficiency, I think we've touched on multiple times. Look, here's the reality. It's where I started, is we have got these demands coming at us that are relentless, that growth. I can personally tell you 3 years ago, a little under about two years ago, 2.5 years ago, when I started, we were moving about 40 petabytes a day across our backbone. It's 100 petabytes today. Over a 7-year period from 2007 to 2014, the growth in our network was 100,000%. And when you look out at the curves and the demand that's coming at us, that will not diminish. It will probably increase because of things like big data, right? We can now capture and analyze more data than we have ever been able to, and that is just going to continue. We are creating extraordinary amounts of information. Video. Today, it's over half of all content that's carried across the network, and that is expected to grow up to that number of around 80%, as you see. Mobility, we talked about more devices than people out there on the planet. Right now, the estimates for connected devices or machine-to-machine communications around the Internet of Things in the tens of billions by 2020. All generating information that has to cross the network and then be housed, stored, and analyzed through big data capabilities in the cloud. So the drivers are going to continue to grow at an enormous pace. The approach that we have taken is to software-define the network, and we've got targets out there that 75% of our network by 2020 will be software-defined. And it's all about making sure that we've got a full IP-based set of capabilities across the globe. Today, our wireless and wireline networks cover about 99% of the population in the U.S., and we have global roaming and network capability into almost 200 countries around the globe. So this is becoming ubiquitous. It's not just a U.S. phenomenon, right? We invest nearly $20 billion a year to make these things happen. We're the biggest investor in the United States. We strategically partner with organizations such as Juniper. And this is all about simplifying our cost structure as well to be able to maintain that global IT platform that I just talked about to keep up with that demand. And oh, by the way, it's all about the business or the mission that national security organizations, Department of Defense, private entities, not-for-profits, government civilian agencies are trying to do. So it's about strategic services on top of that. If you have the cloud that now can compute at the lowest cost, at the highest speeds, the storage, and now the network coming together, the strategic enablers on that then are software that help you execute your mission. And that's the reality that we've got in what we're talking about today. Every sector is taking advantage of this. And I think we'll just go to the next slide. But the reality is that depending on where you sit in the world and what your perspective is, the capabilities that are going to be given to you are going to allow you to develop new functionality to execute your mission that much more quickly, that much more securely at the most optimum cost. The only thing that I would add here is that these sectors that we've got listed in front of us, from commercial real estate to hospitals to large fleets. So we've got auto manufacturers there. We talk about connected cars, but the government has one of the largest fleets on the planet, 450,000 non-tactical vehicles out there. So when we look at the government sector, they're actually mini microcosms of other sectors mixed together. So we have very large supply chain operations. We have very large real estate holdings for the General Services Administration. VA has one of the largest hospital systems on the planet. We add that fleet. All these things together, these capabilities can be applied within your mission set to better deliver what you've set forth.
Hey, and Chris, one other thing that I think is going to be enabled by the virtualization, but kind of tends to happen anyway, is as the country looks more and more at a national critical infrastructure, whether you're talking about the energy labs or you're talking about Wall Street or the medical field, I think the security capabilities that you're talking about offered by virtualization are really going to be adopted by these other verticals as protect becomes more and more important for a growing set of these these sub verticals within our economy.
Yes, well said. So I think we've touched on this, George. Anything to add on the next one? I mean, the TCO, it goes without saying that you're going to take out huge amounts of proprietary appliances and software and replace them with highly commoditized hardware. The investment's really going to go into the software and the set of capabilities that you can apply to a given workload to better execute your mission. It gets you out of a capital cycle, which is difficult, and gets you in an OpEx cycle, which is much more better received, like I said, on the Hill within the administration and obviously within an organization. But go ahead, George.
No, the only thing I would add is I think when you see some of the shifts on the security side, I think a lot of customers are starting to think more in terms of trusted platforms versus certified products as they get more and more sophisticated and need more and more protect. I think in terms of the TCO, we're seeing customers that are more interested in long-term investment protection and using creative finance and delivery models to avoid those big program spikes that you were talking about. So I think this TCO model is going to be very important, and I think SDN and NFV, along with creative finance and other factors coming in, are really going to help customers get a handle on it and put a lot more of that money into satisfying that mission that you were talking about. So,
great. So, for me, it's a question of not if, but when and how is an organization, and for folks on the phone, I think this is a great spot to as we go into the question and answer after George hits a couple more of the charts, is how do I go do this, right? And where do I start? And the reality is this is moving. The train has left the station. We're leading this globally. We started in one market and are now in 170 on this, and so I would say pick a workload, get your big toe out and put it in the water, and start executing. Right? Pick something small, think big, but scale very quickly. Right? And the reality is it's moving, and there's a little bit of a perfect storm coming at government organizations in particular. Sometimes defense and national security move at a slightly different pace than civilian organizations, but you have Networks 2020 or the EIS program coming out, which is going to have a new vehicle. You've got this transition to IP-based, so the old TDM infrastructure is going away and getting sunsetted over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years. So it's going to be an all IP-based set of capabilities. And then you've got a lot of organizations sitting right at the end of their kind of refresh cycle, right? So we're hitting that 5 to 7 year period on network gear in many of the organizations out there. So those three things taken together, it's a great opportunity to start putting that plan together and testing the capability to say, okay, if I've got these three things coming at me, I got to refresh my infrastructure to take advantage of the new capabilities out there, and it's aging. I've got this new vehicle out there that I can use to access these types of services, and they're going to be highly competitive rates, and then I know I need to get ready for this IP transition. Oh, by the way, IPv6, which most organizations have done a lot of testing around it, but they're still not there. You could add that as kind of a fourth imperative. Now is the time to lay down the plan, see what's going on in the marketplace, and start testing it in, I would say, the right places, and then you'll be prepared over the next couple of years to transition it in and ultimately go through that hybrid phase that everybody's going to have to be in for a little bit, and then move out to a fully software-defined set of capabilities. So George, I think I want to kick it to you here for the next chart.
Thanks, Chris, and I think that was a phenomenal intro into SDN and where it is in the progress scale and how people can take advantage of it, and then some of the benefits. So thanks for teeing it up that way. Following along with Chris is the SDN overview and what it is and where it's going. We thought we'd talk a little bit about the impact that SDN and NFV can have in the national security space. And this seemed like a good place to start because the national security market has a history of really being early adopters of these emerging and leading technologies, and then working with the Defense Department to find really good ways to scale out and harden those emerging technologies. So we thought we'd go through and talk about what some of the drivers are for the national security space to embrace SDN, and then what industry's response can be in terms of what would industry have to offer these customers in terms of enablers to get SDN going and get the benefits from it. So I think if you take a look at the chart, we've seen about 7 different drivers that are going to take SDN into the next space, and we can start at the top and work our way around. I think all of our customers are looking to simplify their network. They want to simplify the way the key functions are installed, configured, operated, how they're upgraded and how they can perform troubleshooting. And I think a lot of that simplification is done through things like UCPE, where you go into these multifunction commercial appliances that offer you that online or almost web-based capability. The next thing that they're looking to do is for some pretty sophisticated orchestration so that they can have all their network assets working together in an effective and efficient manner. And this is physical as well as virtual, so that there's going to be more of a requirement for you to be able to take those virtual packages and software platforms you have in the network and just look at them the same way you do the physical. Migration is another key. And once again, I'll come back to UCPE, but customers really want to take the capability, performance, and intelligence that they've got residing in the WAN or the data center and push it out to the tactical edge or the mobile user, so that users can really effectively do their job with all the capability that resides back in the branch or the campus or the headquarters. I think they want to try to gain some agility in the network so they can really reduce the time between when a key service or feature or capability is needed in the field to when they can design, develop, and deploy that capability or service to the people who need it. And when you start to get into a software world where you don't have to worry about buying hardware for a lab, but can do a simulation and modeling in a virtual environment, and you can test how the application will work in the real world, it's just going to reduce that time to deployment. I think that they're looking to reduce in the reduction box. They want to reduce the footprint, the space, weight, and power. As Chris talked about, as you have to have more and more capability. In the past, that just meant bigger and bigger boxes. So you started to worry about the space that you have in the data center or the power that you're going to require to run things. Whereas you can virtualize more and more and automate and geographically distribute capability, you're able to reduce that footprint. I think while reducing the footprint, you can also reduce the cost. So you can reduce the labor, you can reduce the hardware, you can reduce travel. There's just a wide range of reductions once you start to go virtual and start to just do automated scripts that you can push out to everywhere. And you can also reduce the complexity. You can reduce the number of humans that have to actually do manual processes and set those up with automated scripts or automated processes so that you're reducing complexity, you're reducing the potential for human error, and you're making the whole system more efficient. I think Chris has done a really good job talking about the increased protection that customer wants, no longer static firewalls, but more real-time unified threat management systems, the ability to identify threats in a real-time manner and do real-time enforcement on the assets that might be impacted. And then lastly, I think it's just integration, so that customers feel that they can integrate the intelligence, the capability from one set of devices on the network to others, or figure out how they can use the network intelligence to help protect the wrong people from getting in and seeing things. So I think if you take all those into play, you can really build a very intelligent, agile, and protected network, which is really going to help reduce cost and increase mission. Chris, is there anything that you'd like to add to those set of capabilities?
Yeah, no, George, I think you did an awesome job of just laying that out. It's the one thing you don't want to be sitting around and talking about to the business leadership, right? Whether it's on the intelligence community, defense, is the network, right? I mean, we're talking about it because we live it, right? But the reality is that this is such a key strategic enabler that's going to be underneath, right? It's going to be transparent, but it's going to allow that focus on the mission, new functionality, new capabilities, very quick time to production for applications, especially if they're new applications, right, that are API-based, that can take advantage of the dynamic up and down of the network, the movement of the network. I think it's extraordinary. So, I think you just did a great job of laying that out, George.
No, thanks, Chris. And I think also as you start to you bring all these capabilities to bear, I think what you're going to allow the customer to do is really create a very high set of software developers or knowledge engineers that really can take advantage and make the components across compute, networking, and storage work more holistically together and get more out of it versus having the individual stovepipes trying to get as much efficiency within the stovepipe as possible. So I think this is going to really open up the customer to relook at how they work and satisfy mission. I'd like to go to the next slide, which really talks about given that those are the drivers from the customer side, and that's where the customer really wants to try to get to. What can industry do to get that done? And the number one thing that I think is going to be really important is you're going to start to see more strategic partnerships and strategic alliances from the industry side that really work for the customer. And a good example of this is the UCPE that we brought up. AT&T and Juniper really worked together. AT&T identified what would be just disruptive and revolutionary in the network in terms of replacing single purpose-built devices, multiple ones, and replacing it with a commercial appliance that really is very agile, very fast, and very low cost. So I think you're going to see more strategic partnerships popping up where these alliances put together a lot of the SDN or NFV capability. I think open standards are going to be critical in terms of when these alliances and partnerships start to evolve and more capability are laid out in terms of integrated stacks or converged systems. You're going to want those converged systems or integrated stacks or applications to be able to work with other assets on the network. And I think the one way to do that is to make sure that everybody's playing to open standards and open protocols. Next, you're going to want to really start seeing things like integrated solutions coming onto the market. And this is where you're going to start seeing storage networking and compute start to merge from the industry side, so that instead of the customer having to buy storage from one place, networking from another, and then compute from a third, and then trying to put them together the best they can, you can really start creating optimized systems which are driven by customer use cases. So if a customer says, this is what I'm trying to get to with this particular system, we should be able to, in industry, get together, find the right partners, and then design and develop a system that's optimized for that customer use case. I think education and training are going to be critical as we move forward, because we really are starting to talk about getting customers these virtualized platforms that are going to offer a lot of potential, but are going to require different skill sets and new skill sets moving forward. They're going to be able to have a lot more control over how they can customize these platforms. And so I think the more we can educate and train customers on this new capability, the more quickly SDN will really take off. I think the next thing is to create some innovative models. And these innovative models, in my mind, the business models have to be just as creative and innovative as the technology. So are there ways to develop delivery packages, utility-based pricing, dynamic port pricing, that you can get customers so they get the best value in a very flexible system? Can customers take more use of financing so that they can use 3 or 5 year SLAs, or start to buy cloud as a service versus just point products? And then lastly, and Chris hit on this pretty well, I think you really do want to make sure that we offer a very, very secure supply chain. How's the software developed? How do we audit? So that the customer knows that as the systems become more flexible and more agile, they're just as protected all the way from code development through manufacturing out to compliance and check-in. So I think there's going to be a lot of responses both through individual companies and these strategic alliances and partnerships that are going to be forming, that are going to enable a lot of the SDN capability that Chris had talked to in his portion of the presentation. So, Chris, are there some things that you'd like to add in terms of how we're going to help enable our customers to get to the SDN Dream?
Well, I would just say, I've having been in this industry, as many of you have who are on this call, we can be a little bit hyperbolic at times about, the next great thing, whether it was, service-oriented architecture back in the day, or cloud, and then big data, and now software-defined networking. But all those things actually came true, and together have allowed us to kind of move forward at the pace that we are. So what I would end up saying on this, though, is that software-defined networking has moved more quickly than any of those other ones I just named, than anything I've ever seen before. If you asked me a year ago, how far along would we be in development and fielding of these capabilities, we are very far along. I alluded to this earlier, one market in 2014 to 170. But that's 170. Let's not call it a market, it's a city, right? 170 cities around the United States today with this capability, and the growth is going to continue, and then add the universal CPE, which is now being rolled out. This is a reality that is going to deliver on the promise more quickly than almost any technological advantage I've seen in my time in this career field. So it's exciting. I think maybe we open it up to questions.
That's perfect.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. Gentlemen, thanks very much. I want to remind any of you who haven't sent a question in, the Q&A box is your entree for throwing questions at our two speakers. Got some in there already, but we certainly will welcome more. Gentlemen, one question is, will there be any impact on the national security market with SDN and NFV?
George, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll take a first cut and then hand it over to you and help me as I fall off the balance beam, I guess. I think the impact on the marketplace is going to be kind of almost a self-filling cycle, where industry is going to respond to this whole course of virtualization and automation by rolling out virtual platforms, by creating different industry alliances, by offering different services or capabilities, whether it's software-based or services-based, into the market. I think the customers are then going to change the way that they acquire products and services. I think you're going to see some changes in formal RFPs that come out. I think you're going to see different things in RFQs and RFIs. And so I think the whole market is going to develop a new motion and a new landscape based on the ability to go out and buy almost customized commercial products that can be optimized for government use cases. So I anticipate over the next 2 or 3 years to have a significant impact and see some major changes. Chris, is that reasonable or?
No, I think it is 100%. Remember, if you fall off the balance beam, just do a good dismount there at the end. And you're right.
I will.
Right there next to you. I think you're dead on, right? And one thing that's happening that I think that we can't deal with in the ways we have in the past is that the change in technology is happening at such a fast pace that going it alone and trying to build standalone capabilities it's not a viable path anymore, because the rate at which technologies refresh and we get new updates and new capabilities, right? If you kind of think about let's just use the software model. That's why we're talking about software-defined network. Releases are happening weekly, right? Sometimes daily, and they roll out and they work, right? I mean, if you look at, I use the phone example, is that you go update your app almost, you have all these apps on your phone doing all these different things you used to carry all these devices for. Well, that's happening today in the network, and the question is, how does a government organization take advantage, or a commercial entity take advantage to stay competitive or to better execute their mission? And the reality is they're going to have to get out there and be moving at the same rate of change, right? So it's going to have to be, every organization is becoming a software organization. It's that critically important. There was the term that was put out there, software is eating the world. Well, the reality is it is, because it's got to become the DNA of the organization to deliver their mission. So I think the reliance on commercial capabilities that are moving at that pace with the right security and and certifications for defense and national security is an imperative.
Yeah, and Chris, one more, I think, point that I've seen, having started as a linguist in the government in 1979, is back then the people who understood the mission or had different disciplines didn't understand the technology. So mission people, operational people, really consumed the technical capabilities that they were given, and really didn't have any expectations other than what they received. I think this new generation is they're growing up in with Facebook. They're growing up with their iPhones, their iPads. They're living out of the cloud. They don't even remember when they actually stored something on one of their devices because they never had to. I think there's just going to be this increasing demand for government agencies to deliver better and better and quicker and more agile capability to the mission and operational people, just because the expectation's there. And I think that's going to help drive this SDN and virtualization effort as well.
Okay. We have another question here. What is the potential impact on mission with SDN and NFV?
So I'll take a crack at that first, and George, you can help me out from there. I take the example of, forward operations, right? If you think about how we train and operate in the government space, DoD or national security in particular, right? Those areas, there's a need to be able to train, at home base, for use a defense example in particular here, to train and equip and be ready to execute the mission for the Department of Defense in the home base, but then to be able to in transit operate and then get to the forward operating base and carry out the mission, whether it's humanitarian or other operations. And so this capability will allow for a seamless set of communications, all IP-based, right, which is a big shift from where we are today, but is where everybody's leaning, is who's going to have the information advantage from situational awareness, the ability to operate at will. These types of capabilities are going to allow that in a way that's never been done before, right? It's going to be much more quicker to lay down. It's going to look homogeneous, I believe, instead of necessarily heterogeneous, and it's going to be highly secure. And if done right on the applications and analytics side, provide better visibility and situational awareness and information to execute the mission than ever before, right? At a cost that's never been done before either.
Yeah, Chris. I think you're spot on, and I think the whole key, as you were talking about, is really the ability to look at the network not as a cost but as a mission enabler, and then start to actually evaluate your network's capabilities in the terms of true mission. And one example that I think of is if you take a look at government programs like the Windt program, where you have Humvees that are out in the field, and you've got our soldiers in those vehicles. In the past, they've had to have a multi-purpose device for every networking function that was in the Humvee, which was incredibly important. If you can virtualize that, if you can reduce the amount of hardware through virtualization with something like a UCPE, where you put this commercial low-cost appliance in there that can help reduce the space, weight, and power, now all of a sudden you can replace that networking hardware with armor or weapons or other things that can help protect our soldiers. So I think the more we can get the network into that mission context and start explaining how we can really help mission by saving lives, increasing capabilities in the field, I think to me that's where the real excitement is for this initiative.
Okay. Here's a plain speaking question. Simply put, where's the optimum place to start with an SDN or virtualization initiative?
Chris, you want to take a first cut at that one?
Yeah, George, you want to go? Or you want me to jump in first?
Well, why don't you take a first shot at this, because I think this is more up your alley, and then I'll see if I can add anything.
Look, I would pick something that's very real that's in front of you right now that takes advantage of those things that we talked about, right, where you need to quickly go in and provision an office or a forward operating location right. I mean, you got to balance the risk and the reward here. So I would pick something that you can easily get done, but it's replicable, right? So opening a new branch office for a recruiter, let's just say, I'll just pick that, right? When these move, they're pulled up and they're pulled down. They move around in strip malls around the nation, critically important to ensuring we've got a pipeline of talent coming into the military. Start right there and provision these offices that are coming up and coming down. Give them just what they need from a security standpoint. Enable the mobile capabilities around this, so it's not just a benefit to the office, but it's them out on the street. Recruit, like I said, the best talent, and using mobile device ecosystem. Right? That's a great example of a starting point, or within national security, if there's branch offices or operations in which there's an opportunity to test out a capability. I think it's a very good starting point, and I would get one big toe in the water, nearly immediately, with an eye towards that and how does the enterprise really value. But I would start somewhere, big thoughts, and then scale very quickly.
Yeah, I think Chris nailed it. I think you want to find some place that's mission relevant, that's relatively small, that you can control and show success, and then build out from there. So, Chris, I think you were spot on.
Yeah, and I was just going to throw in, I know that signal generally is more defense, national security, but the census is one of the largest peacetime, if not the largest peacetime government activity, right, where we have hundreds of thousands of enumerators that have to go out, and we're 140 million households out there. Think about the spin up for managing those people, collecting critically important information, getting it back in, analyzing. That's a great example of where a capability like this is, instead of going and buying a bunch of gear, setting up a static network for a couple of years and then pulling it back down. This you can provision up and down as you need, and it's there's just a ton of opportunities out there. I think it depends on where you stand in the world and what your mission set is, but I would pick something, I would go after it, and I mean it is a reality, and it's very close to becoming mainstream.
Okay. One question that's here, I think you folks have already addressed this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is security a major concern?
George, I'll let you start, and then I'll come in after.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the issues that when you're thinking about SDN or NFV that you've got to consider is the network's under increasing attack. There's more sophisticated attacks coming in. And so security, I think, is becoming more and more of a front row seat. And I think because of that, people are a little bit hesitant on trying anything new because of the security concerns. I think a lot of Chris's message today, which is spot on, really is SDN and NFV can really enhance the security of a network or a system if it's really well thought out. And you kind of present it in the right way and do the proper design and development. So I think networks do have to become more protected, but they're going to have to become a lot more agile. They're going to have to work all the devices together, and you're going to have more dynamic enforcement and security profiling that's done. And so I think SDN is coming along at the right time to provide that additional security that's needed. Chris, is that in the ballpark?
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, it's the fundamentals. One, cybersecurity is a reality, right? Our adversaries and competitors are continuing their efforts, and it's unabated. It's going to continue to grow. It's a reality. Everybody's got to deal with it. But we shouldn't get in a trench warfare mentality on this. We ought to be out leading with the new capabilities that keep us as secure as we can be, right, and staying out in front of those adversaries. So I would argue that, it's hygiene, right, that people need to keep up with, right, the normal patching and scanning, fundamental things that have to occur. On the software side, trusted software development and supply chain. And then I would argue that with the API-based nature of what we're doing, the information that we can glean from how things should act, and then when they're acting anonymously, or not anonymously, acting out of the ordinary, that behavior will be better able to be discerned that's malicious, right, when you're in a software-based world versus sometimes what you can see from a hardware-based set of capabilities. So I think there's a step up there, and I think all those things combined actually make this a tougher attack surface. And so I think you get a security uptick. And then add on top of that the resiliency to be able to move when things do occur, or to mitigate them, doing them through software pushes, I think is a much more agile way to get that done than trying to get into a bunch of proprietary appliances with different software capabilities. That's a much harder problem to solve in a quick manner, right? So I think all those things taken together, that we've got the right approach, and it's going to improve our security overall.
Okay, I got to ask one last question here. 4 words. How real is this?
Yeah, I think I touched a little bit on that. It is very real. We're in 170 cities today, and that growth curve is continuing unabated and will continue. We're looking at 75% of our network in the 2020 in 2020 time frame. So this is very real. I think I said it. I've never seen a shift happen as quickly with something like this. And I think it's because of the that phenomenon that we've seen with the demand from a mobile standpoint in our lives and connecting our homes, our businesses, our organizations, ultimately our cities and our vehicles. Everything is becoming connected, and so that low-cost set of cloud compute compatibility and storage, the network, there's a demand to keep up with that and keep out in front of it, and so that's what's making this extraordinarily real. So again, I would admonish everybody on the call to get out there and get in and try and become an expert in it, because it is the way of the very near future, not to mention being real. George?
No, Chris, I think you're spot on. I think it's here, it's going to stay, and the question is how quickly can you understand it, implement it, and scale it.
Okay, well, with that, we conclude our Signal Magazine webinar for today. I want to thank our experts for their presentation, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Our presenters will try to respond directly by email to any unanswered questions in the queue. You can link to the archived version of this webinar, along with previous Signal webinars, on the Signal Magazine website at www.afcia.org/signal/webinar. Thank you again, and have a good day.
Thank you, Bob.